In this bulletin, Christian schools respond to Australian education funding plans. Churches say alcohol advertising should be banned. And the leading factor for spiritual health revealed.
This is In Focus Christian News and Current Affairs.
Hi, welcome to Record InFocus. You're going to love the program we have today. Sue Rad's back in the studio to talk to us about those trans fatty acids. Are they as bad as we've always heard, or is there some light at the end of that tunnel? And we meet a man who went from rock and roll star to Marxist uni student to a Greek Orthodox priest. I bet you've never met anyone like that before. It's going to be an interesting journey. But first we start with Danielle in the news.
Thanks, James. After months of waiting, the public and independent school sectors, including faith-based schools, have been given some detail on how the Australian government will fund education into the future. Kent Kingston reports.
In an address to the National Press Club, Prime Minister Julia Gillard announced plans to boost the annual spend on education by $6.5 billion, phased in over the next 6 years.
I want each of you, the whole of our nation, to join me in this crusade to change children's lives.
Representatives from both the public and private school sectors welcomed the announcement, but were critical of the lack of specifics in the plan.
We are still yet to see what the federal government is prepared to do in providing funding, what the state and territory governments are prepared to do in providing funding, and then what is that going to look like for each Seventh-day Adventist school in Australia once we know exactly what is the new funding model.
A bill to redefine marriage to include same-sex couples has passed the first of 3 readings in the New Zealand Parliament by a margin of 2-1. Based on that result, it seems likely the bill will pass into law early next year. According to REMA New Zealand, Catholic, Anglican, Baptist, Lutheran, Methodist, Presbyterian and evangelical leaders signed a statement opposed to the effort to redefine marriage in New Zealand.
It's very important, I think, Christians take their place in the marketplace. For some of the large immigrant groups, particularly the Pacifica people, I think they're in a very key position at this time to speak clearly about what the scriptures say about marriage and family life.
However, some individual members, pastors and congregations have spoken out in support of the bill. And still on marriage, a decision by a government official in Brazil to register a civil union between 3 people has sparked controversy. According to the BBC, the public notary has defended her actions, saying the 2 women and 1 man have been living together for 3 years and deserve family rights. But the decision has provoked a storm of protest from both church groups and lawyers who describe the decision as absurd and illegal. It's not clear whether the courts and private companies such as health insurers will accept the ruling. Australian charities are awaiting the final detail of new laws that will govern the not-for-profit sector from the 1st of October this year. The legislation is making its way through Parliament, with the effect of last-minute consultations still uncertain. According to Pro Bono Australia, there's concern that, despite the government's stated intentions to cut red tape for charities, the new laws will have the opposite effect. Questions have also been raised by organisations that focus on overseas giving. They're wondering how they will be recognised under the new regime.
The South Pacific Division has a much larger footprint than just Australia, and there are tax implications, and therefore the constraints that have been applied will have some implications on the way that we are structured and most probably the way that we operate.
Inspired by the federal government's recent success in introducing plain packaging for cigarettes, independent Fred Nile has introduced a bill into New South Wales Parliament that will ban alcohol advertising throughout the state. While the outcome of the bill is by no means assured, the Reverend Nile has the support of the State Council of Churches. The Christian leaders say that while they're not pushing for prohibition, New South Wales' culture of binge drinking and alcohol-related violence requires strong action. Other church groups concur.
The advertising in the hands of an organisation with a vested interest in promoting it to the point of addicting the young people, then they've got them hooked for life. It's just not a wise move, and I think it's time for change. We need to do something about that.
And still in New South Wales, a change to traditional wedding vows by the Sydney Anglican Diocese has provoked accusations of sexism. As an alternative to the traditional vow to obey her husband, brides may choose the word submit. Sydney Anglican leaders say the changes reflect New Testament teaching on submission and also require husbands to sacrificially love their wives. But critics have slammed the word submit, saying it's derogatory and dangerous in a society where women are victims of domestic violence. Supporters counter that domestic violence is most prevalent within de facto relationships rather than committed marriages. Canada's largest Protestant denomination has elected its first openly homosexual moderator. The Ottawa Citizen reports the Reverend Gary Patterson was one of 3 candidates for the top job out of a field of 15. Patterson is married under Canadian law to the Reverend Tim Stevenson, who was the denomination's first ordained gay minister. The United Church of Canada has ordained clergy regardless of sexual orientation since 1988. The church's membership has declined over recent decades and now stands at roughly half of its peak membership in the 1960s. Australian right to die activist Dr. Philip Nitschke has been given short shrift by the Fijian government, which denies it will allow a euthanasia clinic in the Pacific Island nation. According to BioEdge, Nitschke has been promoting the Fiji plan, saying it would be an attractive Southern Hemisphere alternative to an existing clinic in Switzerland that helps seriously ill patients end their lives. But despite Nitschke talking up the increased government revenue that overseas visitors to the facility would bring, leaders of the strong Christian nation say they have no plans to take him up on his offer. In the wake of controversy over women's ordination amongst Seventh-day Adventists in the United States, church leaders in Europe have sought to make their position clear. Trans-European Division President Bertil Wiklander addressed pastors from the region's 22 countries at a gathering in Slovenia. He outlined the history of strong advocacy for a change to full ordination for women pastors in the region, but emphasised the harmony with the World Church policy that has so far prevailed. Dr. Wiklander expressed his commitment to participating in the World Church's current biblical study of ordination. Unlike neighbouring Germany, thus far no region within the Trans-European Division's territory has independently ratified women's ordination. After researching the spiritual lives of more than 100,000 people around the world, researchers have found that one factor has the largest impact on spiritual growth. Those who read the Bible on average 4 or more days per week showed a lower likelihood to give in to temptations and addictions, less negative thoughts, and a more active faith. The Centre for Bible Engagement, which conducted the study, says the results are a wake-up call for churches, Christian colleges and ministries. The research has added weight to the Bible engagement strategies being promoted by a number of different churches and organisations around the world. And that's the news for this week. So, James, Bible study is the secret.
Whoever knew? It's like my kids sing. Read your Bible, pray every day, and you'll grow. Yeah, you know that one, huh? Stay with us. We'll be right back after the break when Ken Vogel will unpack religious freedom issues in India. Stay with us.
Because of the generosity of our supporters, It Is Written was able to take the Bible to the Kalahari Bushmen of Africa with solar-powered MP3 players. And through their continuing support, It Is Written is taking our unique pigeon God pods to Papua New Guinea with the everlasting gospel for those who, through no fault of their own, cannot read or write. Only through the ongoing donations and prayers of our supporters can It Is Written continue to grow and achieve so much. Thank you.
We're all searching for love. It's something we all want. It appears to be something we all need. People say it makes the world go around. Can love change? Can true love last?
Understanding Love is a new 5-part DVD series that is helping couples everywhere develop and enhance their relationships. You too can enjoy these 5 great presentations by leading experts. Order your set now. Visit understandinglove.com.au.
Hello, welcome back. And I'm here again today with Ken Vogel from the Adventist Church's Department of Public Affairs and Religious Liberty. Thanks for joining us, Ken.
It's a pleasure.
Now, Ken, today you want to talk about religious freedom issues in India. Now, this is an interesting thing because India, 1.2 billion people, as we know, huge country, very multicultural, multi-faith, the world's largest democracy.
Correct.
You'd think in some ways there wouldn't be religious problems in India, but there are.
And that's probably why it's worth raising this issue, because people wouldn't understand, but there are lots of issues. For example, current issues in Kashmir, which is Indian-controlled, the Kashmir Valley, tragedy there, you know, where the Muslims in fact are the majority.
Oh yes.
And so they've set up a council that has no jurisdictions, but that council is enforcing the fitna issue, which of course is anything that might shake the faith of a Muslim is considered fitna, and that's persecution worse than death.
So this is a religious doctrine, the doctrine of fitna, that is now being used as a blunt instrument to.
Well, it is, because, for example, 7 young people chose to become Christians, and they were baptised late last year. They were arrested, they were beaten, and lo and behold, 3 of them this year have now said, oh, we're going back to Islam. And the pastor who baptised them has been driven out of the valley. A Roman Catholic priest who has been working in the valley for many, many years has been driven out of the valley. So these are issues that, while the Constitution of India actually protects religious freedom, there are, in fact, at the local level, there are great differences.
There's been other times, haven't there, Ken, when Muslims have actually been at the receiving end of violence.
Absolutely.
Or Hindu nationalists have attacked Christians.
February 2002, you know, the huge Hindu mobs attacked Muslims because of what they claimed to be a Muslim attack on Hindus. And so there were over 1,200 people killed at that time. Christians were caught up being killed. Mosques were burnt. 100,000 people were dislocated from their homes. And so what happened from that? Well, just in May last year, the head of the state was actually named as actually having said to the police, don't interfere, the Hindus have a right to vent their anger, quote unquote. And you know, and so
even if that means violence or
well, this was happening. People were being murdered. And here was the head of the state actually saying that.
So this issue of impunity is a major one that really needs addressing, isn't it?
Impunity brings greater religious persecution. Freedom of religion is impacted so negatively when people get away with things. India, the government of India on an index comes up very good with religious freedom issues, but when you look at social hostilities on that index, India is actually considered to be equal with Iraq. That's right.
Goodness.
So,
well, I wish we could talk about this more, Ken, but we're out of time. It certainly sounds like a matter for prayer and thought and getting some more information. Thanks for your time.
A pleasure.
Back to you, James.
Thanks so much, Kent. Well, it's great to have Sue Rad back with us. And Sue, you're here to talk to us about trans fat.
That's right.
Now, what is trans fat?
Well, trans fat, James, is produced by the food industry during the partial hydrogenation of vegetable oils. Basically, what they do is partially harden the vegetable oils so that they're a lot more shelf stable, so that you can get products, processed food products, that can sit on shelves for 2 years or more.
Wow. Now, generally speaking, we think of vegetable oils as being better for you, better than lard or beef tallow or something like that. But this trans fat, I've heard a lot of bad things about it. What are the health ramifications?
Well, because it's hardened, it actually acts more like saturated fat in the body. But it gets worse. It's at least 5 times as bad as saturated fat.
So it's actually worse than...
it's the worst fat you can get.
Worse than lard?
Worse than lard.
Holy cow.
Lard would be healthier for you.
Right.
And that is because we have lots and lots of research now showing it raises your risk of heart disease significantly, and with only small amounts. You don't need a lot of it to significantly raise your risk. So it raises your bad cholesterol, it drops the good cholesterol, it makes you more insulin resistant, so it promotes diabetes, it increases inflammation in the body. They've even found that with pregnant women, if they eat foods containing trans fats, the trans fats cross the placenta and reach the developing baby, and the baby is born with a lower weight or a smaller head circumference, which can impact psychological and, basically
this stuff
brain
is
function.
really like poison in our food. I mean, this is terrible.
Yeah.
So how do we avoid it? I mean, what kind of foods is it in? How do we get out of it?
Well, that's a really good question, because in Australia and New Zealand, it's really difficult to know if a food has trans fat, because the government has not made it mandatory that every food must be labelled for trans fat. In the US, for example, and in Canada, they need to declare the trans fat content
it's been a big
on
issue
food
in the
labels.
US.
Huge. If a food has more than, say, half a gram per serve, they have to state it on the packaging. Somewhere like Denmark or Switzerland, they're not allowed to add it to food above a certain extremely low level. So the government's protecting consumers. But here in Australia and New Zealand, food can hide a lot of trans fat, and we're talking about food found in your average supermarket.
And this
widely available.
So the stuff is in there. And nobody has to say anything.
That's
it's remarkable. Thank you to the government for looking out for it.
Yeah. So things like, for example, most of the bakery type products, whether it's pasties, pies, sausage rolls, usually hide lots of trans fats.
So these are just things that you find in your average takeaway? You go to a chip shop or something
Common
like that?
foods that mums feed to kids, can feed to the family, biscuits, even shelf-stable cakes or wafers, and they're not all necessarily Australian. For example, this is an imported product, has partially hydrogenated vegetable oil in the ingredients list, which is a clue that it's going to have trans fat. Loaded with trans fat.
Now, what's this one?
This is microwave popcorn.
Okay.
Now, who would have thought microwave popcorn would hide trans fat?
You just got to look at this. I'll just take it up. That's your microwave popcorn. It's like a few bits of popcorn in a big lump of fat.
Yeah, and 3 recent surveys, James, found that actually the 2 foods that contain the highest levels, guess what they were? Microwave popcorn and donuts. In fact, the donuts had 30% of their entire fat content was trans fat.
Well, the
so
cops
this is
won't
massive.
be happy to hear that, will they?
Takeaway foods too, whether it's your fries, your burgers, nuggets, they can hide lots and lots of trans fat. So if you're somebody who lives on this kind of food, who has takeaway throughout the week, perhaps once or twice, who snacks on processed packaged food, you're probably eating a lot of trans fat without any idea that you're doing
with all these just horrendous health ramifications. How do we avoid all this stuff?
Avoid the junk. Simple as that. Get back to basics, eat fresh food, fresh fruit and veg, cook your own simple food, and you're probably safest in that way.
It's a lot of stuff to avoid here, Sue.
Yeah. Plus, lobby the government so that they label all foods and declare the trans fat content. That would make it a lot easier for consumers to know where it's hiding.
For more information on this and other food and nutrition topics,
log on to our website. You can also sign up to a free newsletter with lots of healthy food and nutrition eating tips.
Well, thanks so much, Sue. Stay with us. We'll be right back after this short break.
Want to know the answers to your deepest questions? Log on to discoverycourses.com. 15 totally free courses discuss spirituality, lifestyle, archaeology and health. Make your personal discovery today at discoverycourses.com.
So you think you've got your future all planned out, right? Or maybe you're not sure yet. What you want to do, who you want to be. A great education matters. Avondale. It's education designed for life.
Welcome back. Well, it's wonderful to welcome Reverend Themistocles. He is a Greek Orthodox priest, but maybe more importantly, he is an advocate for the poor, the oppressed, and those who most need the love of God in our world. Thanks so much for joining us.
No problem, James. Thanks for inviting me.
Now, you have a fascinating life story. You haven't always been a Christian.
No. It was somewhat in my 20s that I became a Christian, yeah.
But before you became a Christian, you were actually playing with The Flies, which is, for our international audience, it's an Australian rock band. You toured with the Stones, you toured with Roy Orbison, and I was watching a YouTube clip of you guys in your heyday. You were described as the wildest band the Compare had ever seen.
Yeah. I belong to that generation that was hit very hard by the Beatlemania event. Wild music, uninhibited, natural. It just felt as if it was natural. And that caught a whole generation of young Aussies, and I was one of the victims, so to speak.
But at the time, even though your parents had a Christian, they were Greek Orthodox.
Yes.
But you didn't buy into it. You didn't buy into Christianity at all.
There was several factors for that, James. One was that the Orthodox Church at the time, back in the 60s and 70s, it was mostly a church of immigrants, for immigrants. But for a guy that grew up in Australia and who, whose heroes were, Bob Dylan and the Beatles and Mahatma Gandhi, that sort of didn't fit in, you see.
Right, sure. I can certainly understand that. What I don't understand is sometime along the way between you turning away from your faith, you got a hungering for Christ and you reaccepted Christ into your life.
That came sometime in my 20s, in my early 20s. In the meantime, what happened was, as a university student, the Beatle thing came and left, and I formed a rock group, perhaps Australia's first long-haired group.
That's what I saw.
Australia's first kind of new wave music, the music that was described as the British invasion music, which swept America and swept us here. And so we provided that. When the Beatles left, there had to be a local Beatle group, so we were the local Beatle group, and we took over that sort of thing. But I, after 2 years, got sick and tired of imitating the Beatles, and I decided to become myself. So I went back to university and just continued in my university studies. And there at university, the time of the Vietnam War, there was a great flowering of ideas at the time. From the New Left to Christianity, it's not really such a great ontological gap or leap. And so when you look at the Christian position, which is quite similar, concern for minorities, concern for the underprivileged, concern for the oppressed, it's identical. The big difference is God. The big difference is religion is not the opium of the masses of Marx's perspective, but in fact it is the liberating force of the masses. And so that need to readjust one's thoughts about the position of God is the leap forward from Marxism to Christianity.
Right. Well, let me ask you this, because you went on, you studied at some of the Ivy League universities, Harvard, Princeton, and so forth, became a great scholar. But then you decided to make a leap. You left academia and started working for the dispossessed in Africa. Why?
Yeah. Well, the concentration was focused on academia. So it was certainly a strong faith in Christ, an unshakable faith in Christ. But it was also a faith, as it were, interpreted through academia. That's all very well and good, but then when I saw what Mother Teresa of Calcutta was doing, it just made me embarrassed to think that here is an elderly woman, doing extraordinary work of the gospel work, true gospel work. At chapter 25 of Matthew, I was poor, you came to me. I was hungry, and you fed me. And it's interesting that Christ says, I was poor, I was hungry, identifying himself, in total solidarity with the oppressed and the hungry. In my 40s, late 40s, I decided, that's it, I'm going to Africa. And I was put into Kenya. So very soon after, I was thrust into a Mother Teresa apprenticeship.
And one thing that's really fascinating to me is you went into Sierra Leone. Now, for some of our viewers, they're going to know that Sierra Leone was part of a regional war that was incredibly vicious. Barbaric, probably
even worse than barbaric.
Probably some of the worst acts of anywhere in history.
Yeah.
How did you fare, and what did you do in those circumstances?
Well, the thing is that, where the worst pain is, where the greatest poverty, that's where Christ is, right? So I decided suddenly I needed to be even closer to the crucified Christ, and this is a nation that was completely crucified, so I thought this is where I belong.
What kind of work is the mission doing there?
One of the obvious things that happen in a war is people die. But the other thing that happens, people get arms chopped off and legs chopped off,
Right.
and that's what happened. That's the signature of the Sierra Leonean Civil War, is the amputation of hands and legs by the rebel army as they came in to punish people for voting for the government. The result being, of course, homelessness, people just begging in the streets by the thousands.
Well, many people couldn't work, could they, I guess? Right.
Exactly. So how do you deal with that? Well, we sort of took some of them and put them into a shelter that we created a little bit out of Freetown, a place called Waterloo. So we built a lot of shelters for them. And then we had to feed them, so we have to make sure they're fed as best as we could. We get containers coming from overseas for us with rice and food supplies, so we give them that. And then we have to provide them with some kind of medical assistance. So we created a clinic for them where they get free medicine and free medical services for themselves. Then we had to create for their kids, because you could be disabled, but you still have children.
Sure.
Right? So now we provided education by on the ground there on that particular project at Waterloo. We built a school as well, and that school serves the needs of the children of those amputees and the polio victims and the beggars and so forth. So that's one aspect of the work we're doing.
How can they get? I mean, we're in Australia. Sierra Leone seems like a long way away.
It is a long way away.
How do we do it?
The best way is, I would ask your viewers to Google in Paradise Kids #4, numeral 4, right. Africa.
And we'll put that address up on the screen so our viewers can see it.
And everything will come out there, and they will see how to go about it. There's all kinds of systems that these nice people have put for us. Yeah.
Oh, great. Well, listen, Themi, it's so good to have you on the show. You were once described as being part of the wildest rock band in Australia. I think now you're the wildest priest out there in Africa, but in the best of all possible ways. And it's just been a delight to talk with you.
Thank you, James. Thank you.
Thank you. Stay with us. We'll be right back after this short break.
Who is Jesus? A 6-part exploration of the life and the teachings of Jesus Christ. In this series, we'll look at how Jesus helps us understand issues facing us today, such as pain and healing, how we treat each other, worry-free living, fear of the future, and the kingdom of God. That's our quest, to come eye to eye, if you will, with Jesus, the real Jesus.
Welcome back, and thanks for watching this week.
So, James, what's on the program next week? Any ideas?
I got a few ideas. We have the author of Shoot Me First. He's an Australian cattle farmer who spent over 20 years of his life in Afghanistan and Pakistan serving the people and presumably dodging a bullet or two.
Wow, that sounds like a really interesting interview, James. We're looking forward to that for sure.
It's going to be fantastic.
Wonderful. So that's it from us for now. We'll see you next week.
God bless you.